What is up, everybody? We are here today with Matt Payne to talk about Stella Maris and The Passenger. And if you guys don't know, my name is Ian, and I absolutely love Cormac McCarthy. I talk about it all the time over on my channel, Right Conscious. But Matt is a certified renegade scholar when it comes to McCarthy. And I had to sit down and talk to him today because he's been blowing my mind lately with some of his theories on The Passenger and Stella Maris. So hello, Matt. How are you doing today?
I'm pretty good, man. Thanks for having me on to talk about this. Yeah, Passenger and Stella Maris, that's like one of my favorite reading experiences of all time. So, and I've got a pretty cool theory that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about. So it's cool to have the opportunity to share that here today.
Yeah, it's funny. I've heard parts of this theory, and to prepare for this, I've just been kind of perusing Reddit and other spots, just looking what other people had to say. And I think we are breaking some innovative ground here. And so yeah. So do you want to just kick it off? I mean, do you want me to prompt? What do you
Yeah,
got?
I'll take it away here, and you jump in anytime I slip up, or if you got something to add, just let me know.
Awesome.
But yeah, I want to start just in case there's anybody who hasn't read these books yet. We're gonna kind of overanalyze a little bit here, like really get into the details of all the connections that he very clearly intentionally places here. But the experience that I had of reading the first one, of The Passenger, is just such a heartbreaking, beautiful novel that I kind of don't want to take away from that experience. So, like, just keep in mind that it's actually in its own right just a beautiful, sad, tragic, excellent piece of literature. But with that being said, now let's overanalyze a little bit. And probably we should, maybe for people who haven't read these books before, just a little brief overview of what they are. Although I think probably lots of people have read it. Um, but basically the first book, it's a duology. You can't really understand either book without the other one, and it's about like a brother and sister who have, and it's like about their lives and their relationship. The relationship is a slightly perverse romantic relationship. But the first book, it's about Bobby Western. He's a salvage diver. He finds this, him and his team find this airplane underwater, and they don't know how it got there. And there's a missing passenger. There's 9 dead passengers in there. And throughout the book, the plot basically seems to be that some government agency wants to find out where this 10th passenger is. And they think that he knows. So they're harassing him throughout the book. And by the end, they've just like ruined his life. They've closed his bank accounts. They're harassing him at every turn. And so it seems on the surface to be like a thriller, and a really cool one when those come in. But the truth is, most of the book is just a series of vignettes about loss. That's how I experience it. It's just like he's got a meeting with there's like a whole chapter where he visits his grandmother, and he's just talking about the people they've known who have died. And he meets like his old friend out in the woods who's lost his mind, and he's just like this alcoholic ranting and raving out in the woods. So it's a bunch of reminiscences about loss and just tragedy and human frailty, human madness. And that's the experience of the book. And that is so overwhelmingly the experience that when this thriller plot comes in, it almost feels ham-fisted, like he's toying with you a little bit, because it's just so good. It's so like you want to find out, like, who are these agents? What do they like? Where did this airplane come from? And it almost seems ham-fisted. Um, I should also say that each chapter is prefaced by a short chapter about his sister. So his sister, this takes place in 1980, but his sister committed suicide in 1972. So so we get, and she was apparently schizophrenic. They're both math geniuses, but they both decided not to pursue a career in math and physics. But she has these little short chapters where it's basically her having a conversation with her hallucinations, who are putting on kind of a performance for her, but it's really banal, really empty. They say pretty much nothing. And it's a little weird that she has this kind of, and the main guy, the thalidomide kid, who's this like little freak with flippers and a messed up head. And he's like, it seems like he's trying to keep her from committing suicide. And we know that she kills herself at the end of it anyways. And that's what it seems like. The theory that I'm going to present is actually when she committed suicide, the theory is that she's a math witch, and the whole action and world of the first novel is something she created to kind of trap her brother in, because they have a romantic relationship. She loves him, he loves her, but he refuses to marry her, which is what she wants, and she kills herself. The second book, it doesn't even have a plot. It's just her talking to her therapist. It's a series of conversations between her and her therapist, which sounds really boring, but she's such a snappy, smart, intelligent person, and she's so kind of, I guess, aggressive in her dialogue. And she's just so deep in her tragic, pessimistic thinking about the world that it's just really, really interesting just to read that in its own right. So, yeah, that's the basic plot. So now I'll it sounds a little crazy because like the plot of the first one doesn't even come into the second one. The whole like passenger, the airplane, the FBI or whatever government agency they are doesn't even come into play in that second book. So like, how is that a sequel? And it's really a prequel because it takes place in 1972. So, all right, my thesis is that Alice is a math witch. She either traps or saves Bobby, her brother, in the world of the first book. Um, yeah, okay. So, but the first indication that I had of this was there's something at the beginning of the first book, and then also it comes up at the end of the second book. And this, a lot of these just feel like hints, and it's going to feel like grasping at first, but I'm going to like lay more and more details, and I think it'll become more undeniable. Although it's hard to say exactly what he meant. But anyways, at the beginning of the first book, her first chapter, the thalidomide kid, her hallucination shows up, and she asks him, "How did you find me? How did you find my room?" And he said, "Oh, it's easy. Room 4C, as in I foresaw it." So there's a little bit of wordplay. So room 4C, fourth floor, room C, but he said I foresaw it. So there's a bit of wordplay. And at the end of the second book, she had been planning to take a trip to Romania, and her therapist asks her, "Did you ever take that trip to Romania?" And she said, "No, I didn't. That was plan 2B, as in or not to be." So there's another little piece of wordplay along with like a number and letter pairing, which rooms like in the first one it's about room numbers, and the second one is plan 2B. But then, of course, these to me, it jumps out that these are also how airplane seating or theater seating. But airplane seating is relevant here because the plot of the first book includes this missing passenger. So, what do airplane seats? You go like row 4C, 2D, whatever. So that okay feels like a bit of a stretch, except he clearly draws attention to it at the beginning and end of this duology. Also, when the therapist asked her, "Did you ever take that trip to Romania?" The reason she was going to take that trip to Romania is because their ancestor, Bobby and Alice's ancestor, came from Romania on a ship like 100 years ago or more. And the mother and the daughter came over on the manifest, but so they both embarked, but in America, only the daughter disembarked. The mother was either lost at sea or died on the way, something like that. So there's a missing passenger in connection to this 2B and 4C, which is like airplane seating. Okay, so here he's clearly trying to get us to think this. Now, at this point, you could think that maybe the cleverness of this entire thing, maybe he's toying with us in the same way that these banal hallucinations are toying with Alicia. Because like it's putting on just like this silly little show while she's suffering her mental problems and her loneliness, basically. So it's like it's really about the experience of loneliness, but you're getting caught up in these little shows. But there's more. Okay, some of this is a bit okay. Let's see. Romania, missing person. Another thing, yeah, he's a salvage diver. When she's talking about how she wants to commit suicide, she goes in like a 3 page, really kind of dark, perverse exploration of how she might want to go out in a boat, tie an anchor around herself, and drop to the bottom of the ocean. And she goes into detail about why she changed her mind, like this would be an excruciating death. She goes into just all kinds of detail about it. One thing she says is that it would take the cold might keep you alive for longer than you realize. Now, who knows what that means, but it's kind of relevant that he is a salvage diver, right? So she kills herself. We don't ever learn how she killed herself, but if she did it this way, it would be relevant that he is a salvage diver. Another thing, so she's got this perverse lust for her brother. She says things like, there's two things. One is, yeah, she wanted him to enter her like a cathedral. So that's a bit that is like perversely erotic for a thing to say. Um, but at the beginning of the book, the very opening chapter, this hunter finds a dead girl in the woods, and he says that her attitude was that of an ecumenical statue whose attitude asks that her history be considered, So she wanted to be studied. And there's a red sash tied around her. She wanted to be found. She wanted to be studied. She wanted to be entered like a cathedral. This first book, when he's not reminiscing about loss, and basically his history is her history because they're brother and sister. So he is considering her history throughout the entire first book. He's overwhelmed with loss. He's overwhelmed with he misses his sister. He loved his sister despite how perverse it all was. He misses her, and it's all very sad. And also, like, there's a couple chapters where he goes into great detail about physics and the history of physics in the 20th century and sort of the metaphysics, like what it means for the world to operate the way it does. So that is basically, he's entered a cathedral. He's treating the world like a cathedral. All this thought about physics is something of a prayer or something of a. He's considering the big questions. So those are things that like hint. One more thing. She said in a conversation with him, they were looking at moon dogs, like the illusion of the moon beside the moon, and whether or not it was real or whether it was just an illusion. And she said it's kind of disrespectful or maybe blasphemous to say that creatures or objects of pure light have no reality. She says creatures of the light are in need of protection. I get the feeling that Bobby represents kind of a creature of the light. And of course, Cormac McCarthy is deep into Gnosticism, the idea of the light as contrasted to what I guess like we and our souls are supposed to be from the higher world of light. And then the creator God, Yahweh, is kind of a more dark creator of the world that traps us here. So you can see Bobby as a creature of the light. In that book, in the second book, at a certain point, she says that Bobby's dead. She says, my brother is dead, which is impossible because we just read a whole book where he's very much alive and she's dead. So what does that mean? So, okay. Those are like hints that maybe this is what she's done and motivations for why she would do it. Either she's lusting for him, she wants to just keep him for herself, or she loves him and she wants to save him. Like he died. This is her way of saving him. But how? So she's, in some ways, I'm saying she's a math witch. She almost raises to the level of being the Gnostic god, the Gnostic demiurge, by creating this physical world that she traps him in. Okay. At one point in Stella Maris, she says math is magic. She actually says that, she says that math is magic. She says that it's done by the unconscious. She doesn't know how, like when you are doing math equations, you don't really know why you know that it's correct. You just know that it's correct. And she talks about when you are trying to figure something out, sometimes you get stuck and you have to like go for a walk, you go for a shower, and the answer just comes to you. Your unconscious just gives it to you. So we know how we do math. We write out equations and we solve them. How does the unconscious do it? She doesn't know. But it's very interesting to her. And she also goes on big tangents about language being a virus, and the question about whether numbers are real, Platonic math, Platonics of math, whether numbers are real. And she goes back and forth on whether numbers are real, but she seems absolutely sure that equations are real. And I wonder what that means. Maybe like equations have to happen over time. Equations are about change, whereas a number is just a static number that just kind of stays there. Time being the realm of Shiva, the god of destruction, which is what would, give us all this loss that he reminisces about. But the key moment comes when she meets the Architron. So anybody who's read this remembers when she has this waking vision of the Architron, where she says that she sees through an aperture that she's not supposed to see through. She sees sentinels guarding a gate, and what's beyond that gate she calls the Architron. She says it's unseeable. So the fact that it's unseeable makes me relate it to the unconscious. And this unconscious is kind of the underbelly of the world, what we can't see, the operating of whatever is going on with these equations and mathematics, which explain reality so well, right? Like that's our best description of physical reality is math. It's so reliable for that. But like math can be seen as sort of a language. What does it represent? What is going on underneath? Well, I associate the Architron with that. Now, this is interesting because she says it's unseeable. So it's like it can't enter into our phenomenal world. In Outer Dark, another of McCarthy's books, there's a scene near the end where the main character, who also seems to have an incestuous relationship with his sister, one which he apparently actually followed through with. They seem to have a child, an incest child. So this is like a different a juxtaposition of a similar situation. But in this book, in Outer Dark, he meets the three cowboys who are like demonic figures that haunt him throughout the book. And one of the cowboys, the leader, he points to another one, the bearded one, I think, and he says, "This guy, he wants a name. He wants me to give him a name, but I won't give him a name." And he goes on about names for a little bit. And at a certain point, he says, "If you can't name something, then you can't get a handle on it. You can't claim it." That's what he says. If you can't name something, you can't claim it. Now that's interesting because she names the Architron. She sees this thing she's not supposed to see. It represents the unconscious, but like, what is the unconscious if not just the operating of the world beneath our phenomenal conscious world? She gives it a name, and I think she takes control of it to some extent there. I think she gets a kind of power there. I'm going to go on about this a little bit more because you remember Blood Meridian, the judge, he's always, when he sees something new and interesting, he writes it down in his ledger and then he destroys the original, right? Now, somebody mentioned in another podcast, I think it was the Art of Darkness podcast, somebody related this to the end of No Country for Old Men. At the end of No Country for Old Men, Anton Chigurh meets the guy whose $2 million everybody's been chasing. And he sees in his office a painting. And he says, "Is this the original painting?" And the guy says, "No, it's a replica. I keep the original in a safe place." And Anton Chigurh says, "Excellent." So this is different from the judge who makes the copy but destroys the original. Now, I don't know what all these things mean or like how they connect to each other necessarily, but I think the connection is intentional. It's not a mistake that he's doing this. And at one point, when in Stella Maris, when she's going on about language as a very successful virus that just spread like wildfire, she says that whatever you name has to destroy and replace the original with the name. I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but like, so then the question becomes: does she gain some of the powers of the Architron, or does she become it somehow? Does she replace it? And what is it that replaces it? So these are all questions like I can make a lot of these connections and I can draw a lot from them, but there's a lot more that could probably be said with like a deeper reading of all the spiritual and philosophical aspects. They also say that she started having these hallucinations that are haunting her and like trying to convince her not to commit suicide. They show up after she meets the Architron. So I get the impression that they knew that she's gaining some kind of power. She's going to do something with it, and they want to stop her from doing that. I think her suicide has something to do with finally using that power to. I'm going to say I could go as far as saying she becomes the Gnostic god to trap Bobby. They keep calling her also like the thalidomide kid keeps blaspheming. He keeps saying Christ and Jesus. And I can't tell if he's calling her Christ and Jesus. It happens so often that it's clearly on purpose. But like it seems like Bobby is more of a Christ-like figure because he's not like, she's a little bit cruel. She's like super smart. I don't dislike her. I think she's actually an awesome character and I feel for her. But he seems more Christ-like, except for the fact that she killed herself. And then her absence, like if she is the passenger in the missing passenger from that airplane, her absence haunts the whole world the same way as like the Architron is unseeable. I don't know, it's beautiful. One more thing, Eucharist. Yeah, the Eucharist. I think the last page, she's talking about what she wanted to do by going to Romania to visit the land of her ancestors. She did say that she wanted to just basically starve to death on a mountaintop and let the animals eat her corpse, and she would be their Eucharist. So in that, I guess that's another connection, saying that she's the flesh of Christ or whatever. So yeah, that's basically it. That's most of the. I mean, like there's so many more connections, and if you really wanted to grasp, there's all kinds of um, other little indications that this might be it. But these, I think, lay out the main argument. And yeah, I'm curious. What do you think of that? Do you think this is absolutely insane, or do you think there's some legs to this?
Oh no, there's some legs. I took some notes too. I mean, and I'll just kind of, first of all, thank you, man. That was very beautiful, very good. I mean, yeah, I mean,
Cool.
there's a lot here I think we can go off of. At the start, I mean, okay, I've a lot, there's inspired a lot. But first of all, just for everyone listening, we're going into deep analysis here, but I personally think, I think Matt would agree that you could read this book with none of us and it's a good story, like no matter what. Like these are great. Yeah, even whatever, even if you just read it straightforward, she just is a schizophrenic, no problems. But there's a feeling, there's this call as you're seeing here to go deeper.
Yeah.
And I really like what you said, and I agree that one of the main themes of the novel is about loss, and almost we have these vignettes, but it's seemingly characters, whether it's Alicia or whoever, are trying to, especially her, are trying to find stability in logic, math, and equations, because McCarthy is presenting this very subjective world, and as I'll maybe talk about in a second, a very metafictional world,
Yeah.
which could even involve a lot of this stuff. Yeah. Anyway, and so how do you find stability in this super subjective world? And we've heard McCarthy talk about in some of his recent actual interviews about if he thinks math. I mean, actually, Alicia talks about in Stella Maris too. If math would exist, if humans didn't exist, or these types of things. Um, One thing I actually wanted to bring up, because you were talking about the start and the end of the novel, and it was interesting that you talked about the uh, would you say that the history? What was that? There was a word before that. There was a
Yeah.
her.
When the hunter finds her, he says she's like an ecumenical statue whose something like her attitude requests that her history be considered. I'll try to find the exact quote for
Yeah,
you,
and
but
as you're doing that, I see you have Finnegan's Wake back there, and there's actually a James Joyce reference on that first page, because Joyce writes that quote: "Her fair hair had streamed out behind her like gold in the sun, tower of ivory, house of gold. By thinking by thinking of things, you could understand them." Um, and as you know, her hair was frozen with in gold. You could probably see that, whatever that quote is, in that section too. But what's funny about that, so on the first page of the novel, he mentions Joyce, but then at the end he mentions, in Ulysses, Joyce calls King Cormac of Ireland the last pagan king of Ireland. And Cormac was born Charles McCarthy and changed his name later in life after he had read Joyce, after he'd become this literate person. And so he's actually maybe that's his signature on the page, because Bobby says near the last or second to last page, he calls Bobby the last pagan on earth. And so that's like a crazy metafictional kind of thing that's going on. And there's also name changes that we were presented with Alice and Bob, who then turned into the Squire, Robert, and then eventually Bobby. There's name changes all around in the novel. Even the trans character has a name change.
yeah.
And so it's kind of a weird. So there's a whole metafictional angle there. And what's interesting about you talking about, her trapping him, these things, like, is that like Cormac trapping care? I mean, does this go even deeper? Does this go even higher? Um, because at this time he was actually working with a lot of these ideas, because in the late 1970s he was working on four different things. He was working on five different things technically. No, four. He'd finished Suttree and he started to write No Country for Old Men, Cities of the Plain. Those were screenplays that were unfinished and, took another decade or two to publish. Then he was working on The Passenger and Blood Meridian. And at the end of Cities of the Plain, which there's this weird epilogue that is metafictional, that is basically telling the reader that you have to take these works and then bring that out into the world. And so that he was working with that metafictional stuff at that time. He was working on The Passenger, which has weird metafiction. He was working on, and then connecting it all to what you just talked about. So, No Country for Old Men takes place in 1980. The Passenger takes place in 1980. And then Blood Meridian was being written around this time. And the Thalidomide Kid, if you want to, could be a transport from Blood Meridian into the story. All three characters, Holden, Alicia, and Chigurh, are trying to make the world into a simulacra. They're trying to symbolize it. This is their hyper rationality coming out. This is what McCarthy was dealing with at this time, though. He moved away from his wife, moved to El Paso, and really dived deep into science. Really was, he got the MacArthur Fellowship. He was hanging out with Nobel Prize winners. And I think, I don't know if he was critiquing it, analyzing it, who knows, but these were all these ideas are very connected. And so, So yeah, I mean, I really do like this idea of Alicia as the demiurge, either her, I guess, freeing him, trapping him. And what would you say, to throw it back to you, about Bobby never waking up from the coma? Like, is this all just, is Bobby in the coma, and is this just, could this all just be in her head?
If Bobby's
Yeah.
in a coma, then either she goes into his coma, sort of, rather than pulling him into her world. So that's a possibility. Or maybe he's imagining the whole thing, right? Maybe she's not even there. And like the trans girl that he befriends, that he's very, very sympathetic to, that's like maybe his closest on an emotional level friend. Although the other guy, I forget his name, John something, is like his counterpart, the linguist, as opposed to his mathematics. But so like the trans girl could be the connection where they're both kind of Christ-like, and they're two sides of the same coin in a way. But yeah, it's totally possible that he's still in the coma. Because yeah, before she says that he's dead in Stella Maris, she says that he's in a coma. Maybe he never came out. Maybe he never came out. And maybe she went in there, or maybe he imagined the whole thing. She does also say at one point, the therapist asks her if if she believes in a book of fate, I think, and she says only to the extent that I'm writing it. So that's a kind of fictional aspect too, um, in that she might be writing the entire thing. But I tend to think that he died, or that she, but the coma must be relevant, or he wouldn't have included it. So it could be that this is all a dream. It could just represent, like a lot of this, it might be a mistake to look for physical explanations for things, where the coma could represent that we're all in a dream. So if this is all his dream, like his body is still there, but then what does the body mean if we only know about it through this dream? So yeah, I think that that's very relevant, and it's just as likely, I guess, as the possibility that he's dead and she brought him back to life, or that she trapped him somehow, or maybe she created the very
Yeah,
world in
exactly.
with which he went into this coma, right? So if she created the world where it's possible for a person to exist and then to go into a coma, and then in that coma he's dreaming all this, it all just flows back into each other.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. Like they're in this dream that's false, and there's weird things going on, and like the missing box, all these things, because there is no explanation about how the door was ripped open. Like there is no physical property, and I think this is Cormac kind of showing us about physical reality, and it doesn't necessarily matter, that there is a subjectivity to a lot of this.
Yeah,
And what's interesting too, I mean, and that's why I think what you're bringing to the table is really good, because we can integrate it in many different ways. And but in The Passenger, when Bobby is out there on the beach and he's hanging out or doing whatever with and sees the thalidomide kid, that is when actually Alicia is preparing for her suicide in the novel. So like, is there like a, transference there? Shake in the dream almost, you know what I mean? The thalidomide kid entering this dream, trying to signal Bobby, like, who knows?
oh, maybe like if he goes into, yeah. So if he's in a coma, even though he thinks it's 1980, it's really still 1972. He's in this coma, and the thalidomide kid can't get what he wants from Alicia, so he goes into the guy having the coma, trying to get him to do something. But it's never really sure. Like the thalidomide kid is always frustrated with both of them for not asking the right questions, and I don't know what the right question would be, right? Like I
Yeah.
can't tell what he really wants from them. Like what does he really want from them? But it's kind of frustrating. You want them to ask the right questions, but like, what would the right question even be? I'm not sure. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense that it could have been that if it's in the coma, it's not really 1980. It's 1972. She's getting ready to kill herself. He's making a last ditch effort to stop her by going in to talk to the brother. But
Yeah, and who's prepared, who's now, because she's about to kill herself, he really is alone, in this story, she's maybe the missing I don't know. Yeah, we could go crazy here. Like, at the start of the novel, she's the missing passenger, she's not there anymore because he's in this coma and he's trying to find her or reconnect to her. And then she's this specter, a ghost. Um, yeah, and because I have these notes down somewhere, but because when he goes to the island and stuff at the end of the novel, he's carrying like a black book. Like there's all this symbolism with
yeah,
like, right? Like there's all, yeah, he almost has all the missing items later on in the novel, which is like this weird kind of twist.
yeah, that's a funny thing. You mentioned the who opened the door in the airplane at the beginning. some things that are weird about the plane, aside from the fact that it's perfectly intact, so there's no sign that it crashed, no sign that there's any malfunction. The pilot's bag is missing, and the black box is missing. But also, the control panel has been opened up. The control panel being opened up to me represents her opening a door in the controls of things, in the controls of reality. But the missing pilot's bag and the missing black box indicate you're not going to get physical answers for this, right? You're not going to get an analytical description of what happened in the physical world. You're just going to get all this mystery and meaning.
No, 100%. Wow, I feel like we just broke through so much right there. Uh, do you? So we've just totally abandoned that this is all in her head. I think. Like I
I'm
never.
pretty well. Okay, it's not all,
The,
but if
the,
it's all in her
the,
head, like everything's all in our head. So it's like you can't escape that. You can't escape that everything's in your head anyway. Like I don't know. Like I think he's more of a Schopenhauerian than a Kantian. But the
yeah,
whole separation between the phenomenal world and what's behind it, you can't help but be obsessed with it once you start thinking about it. But like like I think Heidegger says, like if you can't say anything about the thing in itself, then just do away with it. We'll just talk about what is. And he doesn't like Heidegger. He
yeah.
likes he likes Kant. He likes Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer says a little bit more, I think. I haven't read much, but like he at least talks about the will. So he says there's something you can know about the so-called noumena. Um, but like clearly these books are obsessed with it. But you can't escape the fact that it's always going to be your dream. It's always going to be your illusion. And so seeking to find what it really means just keeps folding back in on itself with our phenomenal representations. Yeah.
What do you think? This is, I mean, just kind of a total other. But how do you think conspiracies play into all this? So we're talking about the plane, but then we hear about JFK, the government. Like, what's the unconscious symbolism there?
You mean just like outside of the passenger and just generally?
Yeah,
I guess it's just that same. Whenever there's factual mysteries, we just want to know. We just go looking, and there's
yeah.
nothing we can really do about that. So, and like I guess some of that comes out here. Like at one point, an almost tongue in cheek moment, the agents ask him if he believes in aliens, and it's like a joke, right? It's like to me, there's no indication that these are aliens. Like there's nothing of that here, but it's like almost I feel like he's teasing us with that a little bit because I feel like the whole thing is him teasing us, like all of because the mystery plot is just so good. You want to know, right? And he's so good at teasing you with it, but then it's really just about loss. And maybe he's making fun of conspiracy theories generally there, like that. I find myself like I want to believe conspiracy theories when I hear people saying like the moon landing was fake, JFK was done by like the CIA. These are cool, right? I want this to be what it is. But what's really going on, like the really good conspiracies revolve around genuine mysteries, right? So like JFK, it almost like there's too much in what's the guy's name?
Lee Harvey
Lee Harvey
Oswald.
Oswald. Yeah, there's too much in his past to not have some kind of paranoia about it. But at the same time, the conspiracy theories they're too convoluted. Like it couldn't be. And say like the moon landing. Like would it be easier to fake the moon landing or would it be easier to do the moon landing? Is like it would be so fucking difficult to do the fucking moon landing, right? It's like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
would want to just fake it. It's such a good story. Sorry, I cursed. I don't know if that's okay on this,
This
but
is your podcast.
okay. Um, and like say like the 9/11, the third tower falling just like out of nowhere. It's so
Building 7. I have the documents.
yeah, like it's I don't know. It's really enticing. So that's just like the human thirst for knowledge. I guess like it says something about just Kant talks about causality is a task, right? It's like no matter what happens, no matter what you see, you automatically want to know what caused it, right? So that's like regardless of what it means in physical reality, whether causality exists in the noumenal world, it's something that we can't not do. We have to go looking for it, and if there's any mystery, we're gonna your mind's just gonna explode all over even the most insane possibilities.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, just to refer, like thinking back to what we were talking about earlier about instability, not being able to find this. Like a lot of, he really discredits or kind of pushes away a lot of theories, even though the guy just randomly mentions aliens. And it seems to me that he's almost making a critique of our interest in these things because of the
Yeah.
shaky ground we stand on anyway. In reality, objective facts, all these things, as you're just saying, it's all really hard anyway to figure out what the hell happened. If even simple things when recollected, like you have friends and you try to recollect something that happened and there's already differences in opinion about just the smallest details. And it's like, holy shit, how about one of these massive events? Um, Even though I'm prone to loving conspiracy theories, but I think McCarthy here is kind of, I think maybe focusing on the story, about bringing us back to the characters, to these things, and going back to your question about what was the right question, and McCarthy at this time was in very much into the occult, and that's kind of one of the big things of Hermeticism is that if you ask the right question, same in Zen, um, if you answer, figure out the riddle, then you automatically attain this next level of enlightenment. If you ask the right question, the answer doesn't matter. It's the power of the question. And so, is it about, I mean, there's two different directions I think that we could go here. And I don't know which one's right, And what's funny, and that's what's so great about the contrast in this story, is that is the question about love? Is it about her just overcoming her shame about Bobby and all this stuff, Or is it about the real mathematical properties of the universe, or the right question about what the Horts really are? But seemingly it's not that, because he almost discredits or just kind of talks past a lot of that. um
I
and he
think you're
makes
right. I think it's the first one. I think it's about love because also near the end of The Passenger, one of the most sad moments in all the sad moments is him saying he was given one job, he was given one task, and that was to love her, and he couldn't do it.
yeah,
And again, like this is it's perverse. It's perverse, right? It's his sister. You can't. Of course, he couldn't, but it's still heartbreaking. It's still heart. He was
yeah.
given one job and he couldn't do it. He couldn't love her, right? And it's like that. Like, could that really be the key to the whole thing? Could that really? And like, but okay, what if he did though? Then what we get is outer dark, damnation in a godless world. Like, it's like if he had loved her, like she needed, like she wanted, would that have been good, or would it have been the world of outer dark?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, and that's a great question, because he started this actually right when he was, so he got inspired to write The Passenger, I think in like 61, when he was um living in Chicago and read a poem about New Orleans, and he got this idea and started to write it. And that's when he was, I think the next year is when he got inspired to write Outer Dark. And so both these themes of incest are coming in, and I don't know if that was just kind of an idea he was working with, because he experienced something that a lot of men experience, I would say, is that one of his very first serious girlfriends, who he actually had a kid with and married, though, um became his, sorry, uh was very much a small town girl. She was like his mother, you could say. She was from the area. She didn't really have these divergent interests. She just kind of wanted to have a baby and have kids, and he didn't want that anymore. And so it maybe felt like, because they were living out in this little cabin in the woods, that he was sleeping with his sister. You know what I mean? This girl that was just, felt like, someone he had grown up with. But anyway, what's interesting about both of these novels, and, talking about all these kind of parallel things, which is so kind of dope that The Passenger came out so later, and now we can kind of reflect on it all, is that Kola and Rinthi or the Triune and Outer Dark, one could say, is manifested, and the whole novel's about guilt, about running away from guilt, not accepting that, not,
Yeah,
doing that. And the main theme, I mean, I think if we just kind of read this more, I mean, even whatever theory we want to take, the big theme I feel in this novel is sins of the father, the guilt, their parents both working on the Manhattan Project. And
yeah,
that's what screwed them up. When they walk in to, when Bobby's mother introduces their father, who was a Jew who went to Cornell and was this, you know, super good physicist or whatever he was, she meets him and brings him back to her home in Tennessee, that's in a rural area, with her parents that probably never went to school. And the mom said that at that moment she knew everything was over, that everything was going to change, and nothing would ever be right again. And then look what happened, because Alicia and Bobby are given the I mean, were basically abandoned by their parents. It was kind of indicated that they died from radiation or something related to all that.
Yeah.
And then they're given these crazy mathematical talents that they just don't know what to do with. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like it clearly represents like modernity entering into a more traditional life too. Which and that probably even is just one more manifestation of language invading the sort of unconscious life of animals more generally, that we keep seeing popping up. So and all the tragedy that comes from that. Also, I think they mentioned their grandfather or somebody or great grandfather had built this log cabin, this beautiful log cabin. There's like pictures of building this beautiful log cabin, which is now like underwater because of some dam, or I forget exactly why. But they built it without schematics, without the kind of like advanced knowledge that we would use now to build a house. They just apparently knew how to do it. So this represents, I don't know if people would actually be able to build like a big, beautiful log house without some kind of plans, but whatever. He's representing something at the very least. And maybe they could, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Well,
I know
and
like,
and that's actually very metafictional, because Bobby is very good at carpentry and fixing things. Cormac built his own house.
yeah.
Cormac did these things, but even deeper than that, in that section where they talk about that, what happened to that? Well, that was destroyed by the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was his father. His father worked for that, and there was this whole rant about how they came in and took, eminent domain and gave him less than what it was worth. But even worse, they took land away from people who never had titles, but who had been living there for 100 years just on this land and never ended up owning it, and they got screwed and basically got sent into homelessness. And that was just a shot at his father, and that's really what just in McCarthy studies, what I think drives a lot of his works is, especially earlier in his career, is this kind of trauma of his father displacing all these people and him having to be a rich kid. Like, it, to him, that was the ultimate evil. Like, who else in Tennessee is worse than the guy who comes to you and throws you off your
Yeah.
land and says, I have the law to do this? It's not, the cops aren't as bad. It's the guy that, anyway. So,
Yeah, that kind of generational trauma in the form of guilt, I guess, for sure, definitely. It's also interesting, like, I'm always kind of curious about Cormac McCarthy. He seems so critical of language and rationality and the sort of physical explanation of the world. But he seems to have been good friends with some scientists, and like I think like he had a podcast or two with Lawrence Krauss, who I don't know much about Lawrence Krauss. Maybe he has more expansive ideas. I'm not sure. He did write a book called "Why There Is Something Instead of Nothing," which seems like stealing the philosophical question and phrasing it scientifically. But I haven't read the book, so I can't really comment on that. But it is kind of interesting. Like, why would he study it so much if he's so skeptical of it? Right? Is he criticizing himself and his own mad pursuit of trying to understand this chimera, basically? Because it is like it does those. I think I said this already, but like the hallucinations and the vague, meaningless tricks that they perform and their wordplay that means nothing.
you're talking
It,
about the
it
Horts, right?
Yeah, the horse, exactly. They're like empty display of just like nothing. It like that could be the entire pursuit of science in terms of trying to find deeper meaning. And yet, despite he seems so critical of this, despite the fact that he seems so critical of this, he's like dedicated a huge portion of his life to trying to understand it at the same time. Maybe you need to go through it to see that it's kind of empty, right? Like maybe I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
yeah,
Go on. No, go on.
or maybe like maybe you do reach somewhere. Like maybe Alicia, maybe she did through her pursuit of math. Like that's how she found the Architron and got this power, which is like a real kind of power. Or is it a real kind of power, just to spin illusions?
Yeah, is it exactly like, if you invent the nuclear bomb, are you that powerful? Like, you've now, gained the power to do this, but what kind of power is that? Because as we saw, it got taken away from the scientists and weaponized. And she talks about that one guy, I can't remember his name, but McCarthy likes talking about him too. Uh, he's the physicist who was really good, or mathematician, and then at the peak of his career, he just went and was a goat farmer for a couple
Yeah.
decades. And Alicia was writing letters to him. She was actually a pupil under him and had kind of kept in contact with him. So I kind of wonder if, so I mean, just speaking to your point, that obviously, I think the deeper you kind of go into this world, the more you realize that there is kind of nothing, and that's like very problematic. And I don't know if McCarthy, I mean, just seemingly, I guess he's kind of a sucker for the epic. That's kind of what I get. That's why he writes this kind of Melvillian style, and everything is just so grand and beautiful. The sentences, like he doesn't like fucking take a step back, is because okay, he took LSD. He lived large. He joined the Marines. He traveled around. He wrote books. He was dating young women. He was in super deep in these questions of science. Like he seemed to be traveling around the world, experiencing nature. Like seems to be, kind of pushing the extremes of a well-lived life. And like that's just kind of there's people like that, like
Yeah, yeah, that's insane. Like there's it's a perfect way for him to cap his career because it connects to so many other aspects of his writing, and hopefully it does like bring out some of, if it doesn't describe exactly what he thinks, it at least describes his mad pursuit of things, right? His mad pursuit of the truth and how it always kind of folds back in on itself. Like it's almost a psychedelic book in itself because of that. But it is like we've done it a couple of times, but we should again draw attention to. I think it is the emotion of it that he really cares about and that he really tries to draw attention to. And that is like beneath all this play. And like the tragedy is a tragedy of these illusions. And maybe the illusion is the tragedy almost, but it's still what there's no mockery of, there's no criticism of the tragedy. Like he is right there with it, and we're right there with it with him. Like, I think that's the ultimate point, really.
yeah, I would say that McCarthy is my favorite novelist, or in the top three. And it's interesting that we've never necessarily had a proper love story. In The Crossing, we had Boyd kind of have a little something. We had Alejandra. Llewellyn Moss had a little bit. He had a wife, but nothing. Nothing really crazy blossoming. But it's weird to say that I'm cheering. Like I just want a Bobby and Alicia just to have sex. I mean I want that to happen. What do you think? This is another thing that when Bobby's in the cabin in Idaho, he's having these kind of recollections, and one's him at Stella Maris or somewhere, and they talk about aborting a baby.
I don't remember that.
Oh, okay. So there's a scene where they talk about this baby that, do you want it to take it out? Do you want to? And so is it his baby? And I've always taken that as implied that they had sex and he got her pregnant.
Oh, that's interesting. In Stella Maris, she straight up says that they never had sex.
But is she
So
reliable? Is she a
no, not
reliable?
necessarily.
Well, I'll just read you guys the entire section. So Bobby's out in Idaho, and there's kind of he has recollections, or we could say dreams. And this is how it starts: a nurse waiting to take the thing away. The doctor watching him. What do you want to do? The nurse waiting probably to take the aborted baby away. What do you want to do? I don't know. I don't know what to do. The doctor wore a surgical mask, a white cap. His glasses were steamed. What do you want to do? Has she seen it? No. Tell me what to do. You'll have to tell us. We can't advise you. There were blood stains on his frock. The mask he wore sucked in and out with his breathing. Won't she have to see it? I think that will have to be your decision, bearing in mind, of course, that a thing once seen cannot be unseen. Does it have a brain? Rudimentary. Does it have a soul? And that's the end. And obviously, I think they're talking about ultrasounds and her having to see it and give her consent, which is a law in a lot of places in America, especially at that time. And um, and he, and I mean, and speaking to earlier of Matt making the connection to Outer Dark and everything, bearing in mind, of course, that a thing once seen cannot be unseen. And then, does it have a brain? Does it have a soul? Is this the missing passenger? What is this baby? Like, does that mean they had sex? Who did she have sex with? I mean, someone there with Bobby? Why is he there? How old would the baby be? Like, you know,
And why are they asking him if yeah, why are they asking him whether they should keep it or get rid of it? And like he's answering for her. She seems to be in a coma in this situation, which is a little strange. Or like sedated. It's also interesting, like if this baby was aborted, the thalidomide kid has the messed up head, like calipers had been on his head. Is he the aborted baby?
yeah, exactly, and that's been a theory that I've postulated too. Is he this aborted kind of baby haunting her? And another thing is that what but it's interesting is that he manifested in at the start of her menstruation when she was, 11 or 12 or whatever. So I don't know if that necessarily connects, but it could. I guess if time is a flat circle and we could jump around, then that could be the case. But then I wonder, like, remember when she goes under for electroshock therapy?
Yeah,
There's all that stuff. Was he there with her? Was he there during some of these sessions? And maybe to get electroshock therapy, you have to get scanned for pregnancy. You have
maybe.
to, get a pregnancy test done because I'm sure that's not good. And so does he just say, yeah,
I wonder too, like if he's in a coma, is his coma like hallucinating this whole world where he doesn't do the sin of sleeping with his sister, but then during this coma, this dream breaks through with a piece of reality, showing him like you actually did this, and like this is maybe like coma can represent psychosis in a way, right? Like you're rejecting the real physical world and what really happened and the real history that he's not considering. He's considering a totally different history. So maybe that's another idea that it could all be his hallucination instead of hers. And it's his coping with what he's done, which is yeah.
And that's really if we take a straightforward look at the novel, that's what's happening out here. He's running out of food. He's out there isolated in the winter in Idaho just for a long period of time. And he's just having to do this kind of recollection of all these things. And there's other stuff in here that he recollects too, that aren't as obviously epic as this. But yeah, that's a bombshell. When I read that, I was like, holy shit. I missed it the first time. When I saw it again, I was like, wow. So yeah, that just throws a whole other wrench into this, discussion.
Absolutely. That's nuts. Yeah, for sure. Like it means something. It definitely means something that because like even if you imagine that it hadn't happened, then why is he dreaming it? And why is it mentioned? Like it happened. It happened on some level.
Yeah, and is it could be a stillborn? Is this the passenger? Is it the void? Is consciousness? Yeah, I don't know. I
Is
know.
this whole thing just about the sin of abortion on top of the sin of incest? It's
Yeah,
just
no,
like
I know, right? Like, no, I know, right? Like the nurse is waiting to take it away. Like it's like, oh shit, like that's intense, language there. Because most people, let's just be honest, like you never hear that. You never actually hear people talk about like especially abortions that are later, like
yeah.
I read I don't really care either way, but well, there's stories like this though that make me fucking question everything I believe. Like Ron Paul, the guy that ran for president in 2008 in America, the libertarian, he was a doctor. I think he was like a gynecologist, and he witnessed some abortion of like a 24-week-old baby, and it was still alive, and they threw it in a bucket, and it was just breathing and slowly dying, and they were
Oh
just
my.
gasping for air, and they just let it die and just take it away. And it's just like, you don't hear about that really described. When I first read that, I was like, I've never actually heard this described. And obviously not all of them are as intense as that, but like, yeah, some babies can survive, So anyway, yeah,
I
not to
didn't
get
know
into,
about that actually. No, that's pretty traumatizing. Yeah, like when I said the sin of abortion, I'm sort of speaking on his behalf. I'm not weighing in morally
yeah.
in this, but like he did mention again in No Country for Old Men. There's a scene where the character he's reminiscing about a time he was talking with a lady at church or something, and she was upset that they might get rid of the right to abortion, and he said like, no, I figure eventually your kids will have the right to get rid of you if they want. And now in Canada, we have made like medical assistant dying, and it can even be used for. I think in Europe, it has been used for people with mental health problems. So yeah, like again, I'm not getting political here. Although I'm against suicide generally.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
against it just for the record, but yeah, clearly there's some kind of connection here. So this whole thing as like a crime and punishment, a meta crime and punishment of abortion. Um, that resonates on a certain level too.
Is that a further sin? Yeah. Is that just like, causing further delirium? I know I've known women before who've had abortions and highly regret it, later on. And like that it has even caused them psychosis. I knew one lady who couldn't go to work on the anniversary of this abortion that she had gotten because she'd have like a mental breakdown every year.
Oh man,
Like,
that's sad. That's sad. Yeah,
and you know, interesting enough in the archive, the letter that Alicia wrote to Bobby, that Debussy or whatever her name is, was said to read, but we never learned what was in it.
yeah,
There is that letter over there, and it basically states that you know, I've always loved you and we've always been in love, and like you were the best. Like she basically, it's just about them loving each other. It's nothing too epic, like they had sex or anything, but she just talks about their deep love for each other and how, she's always, so I'm like, that could maybe add to this kind of pile of they maybe were sleeping together. Maybe this was realized,
So you get
maybe,
the indication when you read that, you get the indication that these are lovers. This is a letter between people who have been together.
it's not that heavy, but then when I think about it in context, they were in Europe together. They were, traveling around the world. And this is kind of after some of the earlier sequences of them dancing and this other stuff. And her in the car asking him to have sex with her or like be with her. That's all after. So like, is Bobby actually resisting? Um,
Yeah, it might be his fantasy that he resisted, right? Like you like this whole thing could be his fantasy of being a good person who didn't do it.
Yeah, because we only get that. Like I said, we get kind of this earlier segment of when she's a little bit younger, when she's like 11, 12, of him resisting. But a couple of
Yeah,
years later, when she's actually in Europe with him, we don't actually hear about what happened over there. We don't hear about, like I said, they're sharing rooms, they're flying on planes together. Like, you know, I don't know. But, seemingly with where they were at and their feelings for each other back then, it would take a superhuman amount of self-control not to just go into that, because it doesn't seem like he has any other lovers or any other interests.
no.
So
So then, how does that? Okay, if we follow that he actually did this, and that the passenger is him coping with that sin, and they did an abortion, and he regrets that. Then what does that say about Stella Maris then? So like, is that his fantasy of her from his perspective? Is like, and he's imagining that like she created this world, so like she trapped him. So it's like the sort of putting her up as some kind of cosmic seductress, just painting her as that, as like building this world that trapped him. So is she? So that's not even her thoughts. Like we never ever get to see her thoughts. Like she's been completely erased. From this perspective, where they consummate and have an abortion, she's been completely erased. Only his fantasy of her, and that the Debussy, the trans girl who's his friend, could represent that transformation. He becomes her because she's just his fantasy now.
yeah, because there's actually a connection there with the Debussy, that she is I can't remember that. Oh, that she okay. She also has a younger sister that's pretty. They have parent problems. There's like, she serves as a dyad. I can't remember all the exact details. I had talked about this, I think, in the first week, but she serves as a dyadic figure to him, or like a shadow contrast.
Yeah, it's just endlessly. Everything just folds back in on itself. It's nuts. But this is clearly crucial. Yeah.
Yeah, and how it relates and what it does, and like I think all of our stuff could, not to, this sounds so cliche and it may just be the dumbest thing I say all day, but you talk about Alicia trapping him, the baby trap, I don't I don't know, I is that what's happening? They're trapped in this trapped in this, yeah, this reality of what could have been. Yeah, there's a lot there, which, I guess we just don't have enough to process that. We'll have to come back and, you know,
Well, maybe like it would be really interesting if people heard some of these ideas and then just build upon them too,
yeah,
because it's endlessly stimulating. This is very much the kind of thing people could write their thesis on, right?
yeah. Because we have multiple things going on here. I mean, we have multiple things that I think could all be assembled. We have all the metafictional stuff. We have all the great stuff that you dropped about, like with the names like foresaw and aftersaw. Like, there's all that stuff there. Then there's all the math witch stuff and the manifestation and the kids kind of connection to the timeline of events. We have all the baby stuff. Like, we've basically covered most of the big stuff, and obviously we don't have 100% cohesion yet, but I don't know if that's possible. What's funny about all these theories is that they almost disprove each other. uh
Yeah,
it's
like
just,
if the kid is their abortion, but he also showed up after she meets the Arcatron. He's one of the Sentinels. How can he be both her abortion and one of the Sentinels?
exactly, yeah, that's
But does that represent some kind of like morality to the underlying reality, because clearly, like if he somehow, if this is like his revenge on his parents, in a way, it's like you brought me to life and then mutilated me or something. Again, not judging anybody who does this kind of thing. It's just like within the world of the story. If this is him punishing his parents, then yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, this is crazy. This is abortion. Yeah, this I'm gonna make a video. Abortion revenge, passengers, and abortion revenge story.
Yeah.
Anyway, Matt, where can everybody find you? Where? I mean, this is on your channel, so I guess they can find you here.
Yeah, this is my YouTube channel. Like and subscribe. Also, yeah, I'm on Twitter at Pat Main, and you can find me on my website where my books are listed at patmayne.com. So that's PATTMAYNE.com.
Awesome. And you guys can find me over at the YouTube channel, Right Conscious. This is me checking out for Matt, and we will see you guys over on the other side.
Thank you so much. See ya.
Peace.